Hello, lovely podcast people. I am back, and this is the long-awaited seed oil podcast. So this isn't going to be a super deep dive. I'm actually talking about a very, very recent paper published in the last few weeks. And it's just a particularly interesting one. I might do more of a deep dive at some point on the overall topic, if it's of interest to people, if they find it helpful. But for now, this study came out and it's super cool. This is the title: Foods fortified with soybean or palm oil show no effect on inflammation or oxidized LDL in adults with overweight or obesity. So the reason I particularly like this study, and I thought, you know what, I'll do one on this, and I did a social media post calling out, or not calling out, but Barry Grecker, as I called him, along with loads of others, Eddie Abu being a popular one, and just lots of other numpties. Paul No Saladino, as I very cleverly called him because he's carnivore, you get it? No salad, Saladino. Anyway, although he's now added in salad and fruits and all sorts because he got ill off his carnivore diet. Anyway, this study is super cool because it only really came about, these academics only bothered to publish this study because of all the noise on social media. So if you read the paper, it says, popular social media outlets have recent posts claiming that vegetable oils and seed oils high in linoleic acid cause inflammation, oxidative stress. So the entire point of this is to shut people on social media up. And fantastically, they did that. What's even better about this study is it's a secondary analysis of a paper where, because we have so much data showing that polyunsaturated fatty acids are good for us, they were doing a different study where they measured all of this stuff, because in certain situations we might want to even add polyunsaturated fats to people's diets. But they wondered if we do that, can we get them to adhere to increasing it by doing it in a certain way? And I'll talk to you about how they did that. Is it going to cause any adverse effects? Are they going to increase their body fat? So they did this study and they had all of the data, and then they've gone, cool. Everyone also thinks this is bad for people and it's going to make them burn themselves from the inside out with so much inflammation, oxidative stress. And let's just show them that we have all this data and it's a dumb claim. So yeah, I like this study. I'll just pop it up here for any of you watching on Spotify or watching on YouTube. I hope you like my new setup. I hope you like this just a little bit more interesting than just looking at boring old me. You can see a few slides, a few just bullet points, headlines. If you're just a listener, I'll let you know everything that's up. So I've just got a picture of the paper up here. So if people want to go and look it up, you've got the PubMed ID and the authors, etc., and the study title. But annoyingly, the title of the study says it all. It's no effect on inflammation or oxidized LDL. But at the same time, it's cool just to do a very quick breakdown of the study, what it showed and why. They use metabolically vulnerable subjects, which is cool. So it's people with a BMI between 25 and 55, and a nice population to use because it's more likely to show up in these individuals. Super cool is they used something that's very real to life. Now, this is why I like it, because it's pragmatic. It's not using rats. It's not using in vitro, so like test tube type studies. It's not using silly intakes that no one could ever achieve as a human. But it's using a large enough intake that it's indicative of people who are maybe consuming quite a high processed food diet where they're getting some of these seed oils, so that we can see real world effects. And what's super cool about this study is that they used what's called a crossover design. So I've just popped up a picture here of what they did. But one of the reasons this makes this study a bit more special is because when you just get two groups of individuals and you conduct an intervention, one issue is that you get biological, genetic variation in how people respond. And so you have to have quite a lot of subjects sometimes to get enough statistical power to show any differences. But one of the ways we can minimize that is by using a crossover design where people essentially act as their own control. You have a washout period. And on top of that, using good measurements where we can detect very small changes, or changes, even if they appear small in the numbers, we minimize the noise so that we can see that this is a real difference being caused by the intervention. So we can see sort of cause and effect. Lots of you listening will know that randomized control trials are good at that, but this is a randomized control trial, but with a crossover design. So yeah, they basically used soybean oil, which is obviously very high in linoleic acid, and they compared it against palm oil, which again, something that people regularly consume, higher in what's called palmitic acid, one of the saturated fatty acids. But again, a normal component of our diet. The best thing about it is that they didn't just get people to have like tablespoons of this yucky oil. They just said, I think they worked with like a food confectionery. So they created their own products. So like muffins, cookies, cakes, brownies, bread rolls, stuff like that. And I believe, I didn't make a mental note of this, but it was like eat 3 of these a day. And what that did was increase their intake by about 30 grams a day. And I'll talk to you a bit about that, but I'm not going to talk about it. The subjects did that, by the way. That's the whole point of what I'm trying to make here. And so they did 4 weeks of this. Now, because of the I think I'll talk about this in a minute, but people will always, if this goes against their bias, they will try and fight against it by moving the goalposts or saying that there was something wrong with the study. So people, well, it wasn't long enough, or there weren't enough subjects. And you get years and years, a bit like with GLP-1s, people are like, we don't know what's going to happen, because they have no concept of the fact that GLP-1s didn't arrive with Wegovy, Manjaro. What's another one of the popular names? Anyway, can't even think off the top of my head, sorry. But these popular brand names of, like, for instance, semaglutide or tirzepatide, that they've seen in the news in the last 1 to 2 years. Like, we've had them for years and years and years and years and years, decades, I believe, in diabetes treatment. So they're like, yeah, we don't know what's going to happen. It's like, we do. And then they're like, well, 2 decades isn't enough. It's like, how long until you would say this is okay? So it's a bit ridiculous. But yeah, if there's a study that supports their bias, they will jump on it no matter how bad the study is. Anyway, so this is the point I was going to make, is that 24-hour food recalls were used as one way of assessing whether people were eating the foods that they were given, to see if, because basically what these gimps will say is, well, how do you know they ate the muffins? Maybe they didn't eat the muffins. On the flip side, in any other study, they'd be like, yeah, well, people don't eat the low carb diet, and that's why low carb didn't show better. People are probably out there eating muffins and cakes and biscuits and cookies. But yet suddenly in this study, people are going to shy away from eating these really highly palatable, high fat, high sort of processing level foods. But anyway, the cool thing about this study is that they were able to work with a dietitian that just helped them go, look, this is how you can get it. This way where you could eat it in a day. If you normally have a biscuit, just swap it for this biscuit. They taste really good. And the point is that this study did very comprehensive blood profiling, multi-fraction blood profiling. So they have markers of what would be happening in the body on multiple different levels. And in every marker, we can see that these people definitely were eating more linoleic acid in the soybean group and more palmitic acid in the other group. And we can see very, very strong, statistically significant p less than 0.01 differences between groups in the linoleic acid profile. So we see it turning up in the red blood cells in the correct group. We see it going down in the group that was consuming the palm oil. So anyway, we know without a doubt that people were definitely increasing or decreasing, depending on which group they're in, the stuff that we wanted to show this difference. So it's ridiculous if anyone tries to challenge this based on at least that thing. Here's the long and short of it. Inflammation didn't go up. And again, someone might be like, oh, it's not long enough. It would. In 4 weeks, you categorically would see differences in these markers. We see these moving. And they did extensive measurements. They did C-reactive protein, oxidized LDL, obviously. They did LPS-binding protein. They did interleukin-6, which I'll talk to you a bit more about. That's one of those ones, IL-6, that gets thrown around on bodybuilding forums, social media. One of these immune reactions, one of the interleukins that we see going up in inflammatory states. So the real kicker that's interesting on this study is that there was this trend towards reduced interleukin-6. Now, it didn't quite reach statistical significance. I think it was p equals 0.07 or 0.09. I can't remember exactly, but very close to what people universally are like, oh, p equals 0.05 is where it definitely happened. And, if you're really, really clever, much cleverer than me on maths and statistics, then there's a whole big debate on why p-values are limited. But for what it's worth, they show us something decent. And in this case, I wouldn't be trying to make the point that eating more of these seed oils is super anti-inflammatory. I'm just saying that this ridiculous notion that they are super inflammatory, even when consuming quite high levels, is just ridiculous. It's the absolute opposite of what maybe is happening, and basically there's no change. So this study is just great. It just absolutely blows it out of the park. Now, I've just put this in here, seed oil reduced arachidonic acid. Back in the day, in my early 20s, when I was down this rabbit hole of paleo, ancestral eating, wanting to be insanely healthy, and therefore being misled by people who get paid to question the establishment. Because it's really important to remember that when people go, oh, you're biased because of big pharma, or you're biased because of big food or big agriculture or whatever it is, these very same people, and the podcast I haven't quite done yet, but I was supposed to, on the new Tim Noakes, muscle glycogen is irrelevant for endurance performance paper that they've just brought out, which is absolute madness. These very same people have ridiculous financial ties to be questioning it. And they're far less regulated, and they don't have peer review in anything they do. They just go and sell their unregulated ketone supplements or whatever it is. Anyway, so when I was led down this road, there's this, and early 20s, and I'm busy with this, that, and the other, trying to get my career going, and maybe not doing my due diligence, but I always remained open-minded. And when I put time and effort into a subject, and I got better and better and better over the years as I employed new staff, and I was critical of their work to help them improve, and then realized something in me that they were saying, and I was like, oh my God, I say that, and what's the evidence? So we'd look at it, and then we go, crap, I was wrong again. And I get it. If you're a bro, personal trainer, practitioner, nutritionist, dietitian, doctor, whoever you are listening to this, just a nutrition enthusiast, and you're upset at what I'm saying here. I get it. I freaking hate being wrong. Not that I ever am, but if I was, it sucks. I get it, but it's just lame to then live a lie. One of the things I've done much, much, much more in the last 5 to 10 years is just try and live ridiculously authentically in all facets and areas of my life. And it's amazing. It's way better not to have to live a lie in many ways. And so, yeah, just take this as an opportunity. Podcasts are amazing because I'm not calling you out. I'm not posting your face or your name. Take the time and go, yeah, sheesh, I get it. I didn't know what I was talking about. I was just copying what so-and-so said. And so, and it always starts with a bias somewhere. Something you see around you. Food companies they suck in many ways. They're not here to promote our health. Yes, I 100% am on board with that. Pharmaceutical companies do some dodgy shit. But when you get really good independent research and it just comes out time and time again, and all the mechanistic data is there, and then even like, great if we got some new data, like these sort of charlatans, but let's call them, what do you call them, like mavericks, saviors, messiahs that come along to teach us that, oh, doctors are trying to kill us, or whoever, keep us sick. And I'm not the more I pay attention to world politics, which I shouldn't do, I didn't do for the first 40 or almost 40 years of my life. But, the more I know about America, at least, the more I'm like, oh my goodness, they might be right about all of the conspiracies. What a weird place. But every American, just to FYI, that I've met, I absolutely have loved. It's more their government, isn't it? Anyway, the weird thing to be talking about on a Seed Oil podcast. But it is, it's huge in America. So, back to this. The linoleic acid is the precursor to arachidonic acid, and arachidonic acid is one of these things that people are like, this is the thing, and if you're going to eat more LA, you're going to get more of this arachidonic acid, and it's going to cause this inflammation. And what's bonkers in this study is that in the seed oil group, arachidonic acid actually went down. Now, the very specific small parts of the puzzle, the biochemical processes are not my forte. And very often, and so this study showed there was basically negative feedback as a result of consuming more LA, the arachidonic acid, which linoleic acid is a precursor for, it went down. And so the discussion is like, oh, well, it's because of a negative feedback. And I'm like, but why? I don't understand why. And, I've read into it to try and understand, and it doesn't seem that it still doesn't make sense to me. But that's by the by. But it's really important that when you get someone like the glucose Gimpes or Stacey Sims, who hyper focus on these really, rat studies, test tube studies, mechanistic studies, really small biochemical pathways, and they use these big fancy words, which maybe they know a fair bit about those things, but it just doesn't translate to humans. And we have countless data showing what they're talking about is absolute rubbish. So these things don't always travel. What was I reading about recently? Oh, creatine and endometriosis. And there's some interesting data around that. And again, but it's in such early stages that you just can't leap forward. But no doubt you'll get people like that making these ridiculous claims long before. It's just fear-mongering, scaremongering for fame and clicks and whatever. But anyway, I'll leave it there. It's ridiculous. This went down. So there's just any of these lines of thought or argument that the charlatans are using just don't hold up. And then this is an interesting one I just wanted to include. So soybean oil, our high polyunsaturated fatty acids group, the linoleic acid group, showed a downregulation in what's called the SCD18 enzyme, the activity of this. Now, this is one of these, gene, I think it was, sorry, my bad, which is one of the things that is associated with an increase of fat forming. So very often we are told, oh, people eating more linoleic acid are going to, it promotes obesity. But actually in this study, we saw a reduction in the activity of something that is going to lead to obesity. And in the palmitic acid group, again, sometimes people are like, linoleic acid, it goes through all this processing, it's man-made, whatever. Whereas palm oil, people are like, oh, it's natural. And actually, you know, I think it's called the naturalistic fallacy. We know that calling something naturalist means it's suddenly good for us or better for us is ridiculous. And so what's really interesting is this ties in with a paper that we talk about on MNU. I can't remember what lecture is it. Is it muscle gain when we're talking about calorie surplus, or is it the advanced fat biochemistry lecture? One of those. But basically, in an overfeeding study, they overfed polyunsaturated fats or saturated fats, and they were looking at things like visceral fat, lean body mass. I think they looked at hepatic fat storage, so fat storage around your liver. And what they found in that study, similar to this situation in an overfeeding study, which this wasn't overfeeding, this was within the normal diet, they weren't trying to push calories super high, was that the natural saturated fats were increasing fat storage in those areas, particularly visceral fats. But the polyunsaturated fat group that overate on those actually seemed to increase lean body mass. So kind of wild findings, but it very much supports this finding in this study too. So it's quite interesting. So yeah, I just want to talk to you about this one thing, and then I'm going to give you a little maths lesson. The one negative finding in this study was that a slight reduction, a statistically significant reduction in levels of DHA were found. I believe it was in erythrocytes, so like your component of your red blood cells, red blood cell component. And this is where some of the passion against seed oils comes from, because there's this competition for the pathways, and so we might get a reduction in DHA. Now, bear in mind, this does not mean inflammation is going up. This does not mean it's causing things like diabetes. This does not mean that it's causing dyslipidemia, oxidized cholesterol, etc., etc., etc. All of the claims that are being made. However, it doesn't mean that people are increasing body fat levels. None of the claims that are being made. But what it does say is something interesting for us. And some people do talk about the importance of the omega-3 to omega-6 ratio in the diet. Now, it's hugely, hugely overplayed. I will say that. And I have been part of that crowd where I was like, this is really, really important. But it may well be important for this reason. It might, DHA is such an important component of our diet. It's one of the omega-3 fatty acids that's very important, and therefore super high seed oils might be impacting this. So it might impact. When I did my postgraduate in clinical nutrition, I actually focused one of my research reviews on the influence of omega-3 fatty acids in neurodegenerative disorders, and this was something that because I was really interested in this area. And so therefore it might be like, oh, maybe some of the issues in like Alzheimer's is because people are having too many seed oils. Now, this is where I want to bring in the maths lesson, right? Please, if you are watching, be impressed with I made these pictures. These aren't off just Google. I made these. So in this instance, I'm going to have this red apple, this one red apple as DHA. And then the 20 green apples are, for instance, linoleic acid, omega-6s. Obviously, linoleic acid is just one of those. Now, you can see here there's 1 red and 20 green. So that's a 1 to 20 ratio. And now what these gimps are saying is like, oh, this ratio is so bad. You need to reduce your omega-6 intake because that's what's doing the bad things. And so, little maths lesson to show you the difference. If I reduce my intake of green apples, of omega-6s by 6, that's a large decrease. The amount of effort it would require for someone to reduce their intake by this amount, this absolute amount, is quite a lot compared to eating 1 more red apple, for instance. Also, the amount of time I deliberated of which 6 apples to remove is not something I care to talk about, if I'm honest. But we now have a 1 to 14 ratio, which, if we are talking in the real world of omega-3 to omega-6 ratios, people would be like, that's still really bad. On the flip side, if we just ate 1 more red apple, the ratio becomes 20 divided by 2, 10, 1 to 10 omega-3 to omega-6. So just by eating 1 more red apple, we half the ratio. And it took us 6 green apples to not get anywhere near it. So you start to realize that not only if the ratio does matter, which it doesn't as much as people say, then increasing omega-3 is a really good way of changing that. Likewise, we still need the raw materials. If you had 0 red apples, it's going to make no difference if you reduce your green apple, your linoleic acid intake, by 19 green apples or 20 green apples if you never eat it ever again. So we do need the raw materials. So it's very important to focus on what's going to work, what's going to help. Likewise, understanding that we need DHA, or and we can make DHA from other omega-3s, and therefore we don't need this idea that there's something that's inherently bad for us. Again, if you're reducing linoleic acid, it's quite hard. Or reduce your omega-6, reduce seed oils. And these things can actually be quite good for us, especially if they're replacing other not so good fats in our diets, potentially, if we're having too much of them. Something we massively teach within MNU is just this. I like the word balance. I hate the word moderation because it's a meaningless bump, but balance means something. So if we start to look at if all of someone's fat is coming from butter versus they're having some butter, but they're having some avocado and some olives and some nuts, much, much better. And so in this instance of this study, we can go, okay, balance. This is good. We can just go, we can get in some more DHA, omega-3s from somewhere, whatever. But as soon as you start demonizing this one seed oil, we go, oh, well, what about the walnuts that I was eating? Because they contain some linoleic acid. It's like, yeah, but they also contain some omega-3s. It's just confusion, unnecessary. Now, one thing I want to say is the big difference is when people demonize, they look good, it makes noise, they get lots of traction on social media. And if people do look out for these seed oils, they are used in lots of processed foods. So people will immediately reduce those foods. They will lose weight in the same way that all of the carb zealots say that carbs are bad, sugar, refined this, whatever. And, carbs are bad, but it's not carbs that are bad at all. And in weight loss, we know that it's absolutely irrelevant. It's just calories. But as soon as people reduce their energy intake, they lose weight, they might feel better. They often do. Their blood markers improve. So demonization works for different reasons, but it's not good for people. It's not empowering for people. So, yeah, finally, it's just people saying like, oh, we don't know the long-term effects. Absolutely rubbish. 4 weeks, more than long enough to show some of these changes. And we have a boatload of other data other than this just single study out there. This is just one that I wanted to focus on because it's interesting and very new. And the other thing is people, oh, but it's just one study. There's other evidence. It's like, yeah, there is. There's loads of other evidence. prospective cohort studies. There's whole systematic reviews, randomized control trials, meta-analyses. There's a meta-analysis just published last year. No, was it meta? No, systematic review of all the clinical studies to date. And it's 2025, so it had boatloads of studies in it, and just showed the exact same thing. And that was extensive: inflammation, blood lipids, glycemia. There was all stuff about diabetes in that. I can't remember the name of the author. Again, I'll in the show notes, I always put any studies that I mentioned, even if it's just a rubbish mention like that. I can't remember at all who the author of that one is, but the polyunsaturated fat study versus saturated fat overfeeding study. It's a 2017 study. I can't even pronounce the author's name. It begins with R. It's like rustic or something, rusnik or rushtik or something like that. Anyway, but all of these, I always post them in the show notes. I'll obviously link to today's study as well. Cool. Hope you've enjoyed that. It's been nice presenting to you. I'll get some more of these out. I hope you enjoyed your maths lesson. I do loads of that on M&U, and people love it. Just break it down really simply, and because it is important. Otherwise, you can just be misled so much if you can't do some of the basics and assess some of the claims that are being made. But anyway, until next time, much love.